Welcome to the Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scenes 3 to 5 analysis video. As we've seen so far, Act 3 is a very critical part of the play because it's here where our second key incident takes place. Remember, Romeo and Juliet is considered a tragic love story, so there's two components to this story. There's the love story, and then there's the tragedy. So if we look at our plot diagram for the love story part, the story starts off with the key incident being at the Capulet party when the two lovebirds first meet. The story progresses, and then we have a key incident taking place in Act 3 when Romeo kills Tybalt. That is the key incident in the tragic part of the story. So we haven't yet reached the climax of the story, but we're definitely getting closer to it. Scene 3 takes place in Friar Lawrence's cell. Notice following Tybalt's death that this is the first person Romeo goes to contact, which reiterates the point that Friar Lawrence is Romeo's most trusted confidant. When you look closely at pages 77 and 78, you really get the impression that Romeo regrets this action and is really understanding the consequences of this decision. He even refers to the fact that the prince issued this punishment of a banishment being worse than death. Look at the passages on these pages and explain why. Why is it worse than death for him to be banished from Verona than to actually be put to death? Now, Friar Lawrence finds Romeo's reactions a bit ridiculous and even tries to reason with him. So if you look carefully at page 82, he tries to reason with him and make him realize that Romeo should in fact be grateful for the leniency or for the mercy that the prince showed him. Look at page 82 and highlight the things Friar Lawrence tells Romeo that he should be grateful for. A key component of this scene is the plan that Friar Lawrence comes up with for Romeo. So look closely at this plan and identify the four components of it. Now, the last thing I want to draw your attention to is the suicide references that Romeo made in this scene. And in fact, from now until the end of the play, both Romeo and Juliet are going to make a number of references to their eventual death, or suicide rather. So I'd like you to start identifying these references to suicide, or to these references to their upcoming death, perhaps in a different color, just to remind yourself that these are all examples of foreshadowing. Scene 4 takes place back at the Capulet residence, with Lord Capulet making wedding arrangements with Count Paris. I would like you to consider carefully the possible motives for this sudden change of heart in Lord Capulet's view of arranged marriage for his young daughter. Now, there's the obvious reason, which is stated in the text, which is to comfort Juliet after Tybalt's sudden death. But I want you to look at a secondary reason, or another possibility for this arranged marriage. Consider the overall conflict between the Montagues and the Capulets. Remember, Lord Capulet has just lost one of his prized or most fierce fighters. Could this new desire to get his daughter married to Count Paris have been a secret plan to try to get another fighter on his family's side? Something to consider. If you think that's a possibility, can you find any evidence to support this? Scene 5 is divided into two parts. The first part is the honeymoon scene, or the morning after the wedding night, where Romeo and Juliet are spending their last moments alive together. And the second half of scene 5 is where Juliet learns the news of the arranged marriage her father is planning for her and Paris. The scene starts off with Juliet trying to convince Romeo that it's still nighttime and that he doesn't have to leave so soon. Look at page 86 and highlight the different ways that Juliet tries to convince Romeo that it's nighttime and to stay. Now, the first part of this scene ends in a very similar way to the first balcony scene, if you will, with the two lovers having a hard time saying goodbye to one another. Except for this time, there's a lot of foreshadowing, which can be found on pages 87 to 89. Look closely at these passages as these two lovers say their final goodbyes and highlight the different references to death which serve as foreshadowing. The second half of scene 5 involves Juliet and her parents. This part starts off with Juliet and Lady Capulet having a discussion about the sadness that Juliet's feeling. It's really ironic, this conversation that they're having, because there's double messages being shared between the two women, with Juliet saying one thing but meaning something completely different, and Lady Capulet hearing one thing but not actually hearing or knowing what Juliet's really talking about. So look carefully at these pages, pages 89 and 90, and identify who Juliet is really talking about when she's saying or when she's expressing her sadness to her mother. And then identify who the mother thinks Juliet's talking about. After you've identified those people, I want you to look on page 90. This is where Juliet refuses to marry Paris. This is actually quite ironic what she says. Why is that? Why is this considered irony? The second part of scene 5 is really marked with a major change in Lord Capulet's character. The man who was once seen as very sensible and kind-hearted and even willing to let Juliet choose who she'd marry has suddenly become very hurtful and vengeful with his words. Now I want you to look carefully at pages 91 and 93, and using two different highlighters, I'd like you to first highlight the different names, the hurtful names that Lord Capulet calls Juliet. And then I want you to highlight and identify the consequences that he tells Juliet will be in store for her if she disobeys his wishes. The major change in Lord Capulet is brought on by Juliet's refusal to marry Paris. Notice the change in Juliet from the first time her family spoke of marriage with her in Act 1, Scene 3, to now in Act 3, Scene 5. If you look carefully at her character, we should see some major changes. For instance, in Act 1, we identified Juliet as being an obedient, naive, innocent, sweet, 13-year-old girl. Is that the case now? Or have there been some major changes? If so, what has changed and what has caused these changes? The scene ends with Juliet telling the nurse that she's going to see Friar Lawrence to seek forgiveness for making her parents so upset. But as we quickly learn at the end of the scene, this is not exactly the case. What are Juliet's true reasons for going to seek Friar Lawrence's counsel or advice? Act 3 has been marked by a number of different elements, from confusion to betrayal, loyalty, tragedy, love, hope, but most of all, it's been marked with a transformation of Juliet from this small, naive schoolgirl, if you will, into this woman who's willing to go to extreme measures for love. So that's it for Act 3 and for scenes 3 to 5. If ever you have any questions or anything you'd like us to talk about, be sure to post a question on Edmodo. Remember to check back to see if I've answered it.